Okay, you ready? Connor?
Ready. Josh, thanks. Before we get started, thanks for being willing to do this. And I won't waste any time, but just want to frame it by saying that this is great to have this for posterity and for the next cohorts of classes, and really appreciate the effort you guys put in. The only thing I would ask, I know we're late on time, but if you could maybe leave just a couple minutes at the end for questions, that would be really awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks.
Cool. So network scorecard overview. I'm a user of this tool. Connor is the owner of this tool. So I'm just going to tee up the high level stuff, and then Connor will come in with more substance. So let's just get into it. What is the network scorecard? So network scorecard is how we measure geographic access to care within our networks for members. And the test looks at high level, and the metrics that are actually in the scorecard are slightly different. Drive time, which is how long we think it'll take for a member to drive to a doctor, a provider, distance, and it also takes into consideration the physician capacity, which is member expected utilization and the assumed capacity of the doctor to see members. And then this thing was built in-house over a couple generations, and it's, to my understanding, really come to life under Connor's ownership. And it was used to replace what the industry uses, which is a Quest analytics software, which is really just like drawing big circles and saying, like, is the doctor within, are all the members within the circle? And it's a super painful thing for users to use.
Yeah, sounds all right. Yeah, I mean, Quest and Untitled have other services that provide your data stuff, but and like they maintain lists of regulatory things, which we do ourselves. But, yeah.
Cool. So what are the use cases? So there's kind of 4 that I put up here, and presumably they will expand over time. But broadly, they're monitoring our networks, ensuring compliance with regulations, evaluating expansion partners, and communicating with partners or providers. So this is a reference of which scorecards that we use for those use cases. So the summary scorecard, which is sometimes also referred to as the member experience scorecard, just allows us to look at our network and say, are members getting the care in a reasonable time per our own standards? Ensuring compliance, we have regulatory scorecards, and I should note that each scorecard is specific to a geography. Expansion scorecard is the expansion scorecard, and communicating with partners, it depends on the nature of the conversation with the partner and what we're trying to communicate. And largely, the outputs of these scorecards will flow to the contracting team to try and improve our networks, the strategy team to see how the networks are doing and reporting out to regulators on how they're doing and saying that we're compliant. And in the partnerships context, it's often say like, hey, we want to bring in this provider, or this is how we're thinking about the quality of your network, and iterating with them on improving it.
Yeah, I'd say the primary differences between these different flavors of the scorecard are just which specialties you're trying to account for, and what threshold you're trying to hold that constraint to. So in the summary scorecard, we have a pretty large list of specialties, somewhere around 80 or so now, that we think okay, these are things that we see SCAs for, these are things that we think people care about. We want to make sure that we're adequate, we want to track them over time. And we set our own internal thresholds of drive time limits that are a bit tighter, and capacity constraints that are applied at all over the area instead of just at a county level. And then the regulatory one is the smaller set of specialties. Each region will be defined differently based on what state regulations they have, and same with the drive time and distance limits for those.
Great.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, so high level, how does the tool work? So it starts with, let's take data on our providers, specifically the location and the specialties, and let's map them into this scorecard tool. Honestly, the mapping part is really just front end. It's a series of calculations that's actually in the background that matters, and then the map is just to visualize it. But for the sake of conversation, we map in the scorecard. And then something important to note here is that the data on providers only comes through rosters, which we get from external parties. And the process around roster, like taking a roster from a provider and getting it through to the scorecard, which into the scorecard, is we get a roster, it's a raw file, we pass it to the Bamboo team, and they do this process called transformation, which is adding a specialty tag that we as Oscar firmly understand and can operate with, and adding geocoded locations that allow us to map and manipulate location data.
Yeah, I mean, Bamboo is just one component of the well, they're not part of the Pandas team anymore, but they're like kind of the network arm of Pandas, and Pandas does our entire provider data system. So that's where like how we know, like looking at providers in Roscoe or in any piece of provider data we have goes through there initially. And like that, like only things that come in through roster. I mean, we have some additional sources in like sometimes, but like really, especially for expansion stuff, rosters from providers are where we get information about our specialties.
Which is to say that our networks and our view of our networks are only as good as our rosters are, which means that rosters are super important to be good. Okay, the next step would be, so we have the providers mapped, let's map the members, put the members onto the scorecard, and then the power of the scorecard is running the calculations, the access calculations off of where the providers are and where the members are. And then the other thing to note is that the standard of what is good access are the thresholds that the scorecard is running, and those thresholds will vary by geography. So places where there are greater concentration of people, you would expect to have a tighter standard. So in Manhattan, you need to see a PCP in less time than you would in the rural parts of Long Island, and that it also changes based on specialty. Like you expect to see a PCP to be closer than a really rare subspecialty type. And the thresholds that the scorecards are run off of are set or owned by network strategy, and there's a lot of different feedback to it, but implemented through Connor and the actual operationalizing of the scorecard. Does that generally make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the conceptual, like what is the scorecard, what it does. We thought we would kind of quickly walk through just clicking through it and how to use the scorecard. So let me get out of this. So there's a couple different links given the different scorecards I referenced that exist. So let's say you put in summary or member experience scorecard here. The next step would be choose a region or a network that you want to look at. So I already did that because sometimes the scorecard takes a little bit to load. So just for the sake of this demo, here's the New York network. These are all the scores. The percentages are the percent of members that are within the threshold that we set is good. So if it was 30 minutes, see an acupuncturist, this is saying that all members are within 30 minutes of an acupuncturist in the Bronx. Cool, so once you have this, you can filter on different types of physicians with clicking these buttons. Let's say you wanted to look more deeply into a given specialty type and see the actual map. You click on the type here, and then to look at the actual map, you click this button, go to scorecard, and the output would look like this. So the green is all the places where we are passing the access thresholds, and then you can click into that and you can see all the blue dots are where our providers are. And you click one of the guys, it'll tell you who this provider is, their MPI or TIN, and then if you click one of these squares, kind of can speak more to, you can see the access metrics for that specific square.
Yeah. The color coding is based on whether you're passing or not. When you go into there, the equipment provider, if it's an active market, a lot of times it'll have a Roscoe link as well. Click the MPI. That number is the provider's MPI, which is like your identifier. You can potentially go into Roscoe to say like which location that is. If you're actually trying to figure out like who is this guy out here in the middle of wherever. And then, yeah, you can see if you click on that, it's kind of hard to read there, but you can see for that like block, which is bound in there, you can see the county of it, you can see kind of the membership utilization. One thing we forgot to say earlier, utilization is a metric that is calculated by the data team. We say, okay, here's the number of members in the network, or expected members in the network with expansion. And based on historical claims, we have this calculation called prevalence number. That represents the likelihood that we expect a member to go see this type of specialist in a given year. So if we have 10,000 members with a 1% prevalence, that means we expect 100 members a year to go to that specialty. The scorecard distributes those 100 across the entire geography, and that's where you get that utilization number. So of the 10,000 people, probably only 1 or 2 of them live in this block, so the utilization is only 0.06 members. Obviously, you're not going to have 0.06 members living there, but it's the best view of like kind of overall density of utilization that we have. Then you can also see what the exact limit that area was held to. So you can see there the average drive time for somebody in that area was 7.5 minutes, and the threshold is 45 minutes. So 100% for passing that, and they're also average of a half a mile away, so they're all passing that as well. So it's green, and has an overall score of 100%.
Is that our member experience threshold or regulatory threshold?
So this is the member experience scorecard. So
Okay.
Yeah, so summary scorecard is the member experience one.
How do you think about some specialties being more important than others, like in terms of either prioritizing, or if you were like going to have like a holistic view of how good is our network, and you have gaps in different specialties, like how do you weigh which ones are more important to us?
I think that's 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one, which is how do you set what is an appropriate access standard per specialty, right? And then the second question of, if we have gaps in 2 different specialties, how do we decide which gap to prioritize?
My concern is more about the second one.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think what Josh is saying kind of rolls up in different places. Like, one, the more important ones generally have tighter drive time standards, so like it forces you to have more. More important ones a lot of times also have higher utilization, so there's a higher like required number that comes out of capacity. When you roll up into the scorecard as a whole, like at the top level, where it's the table, like each of those line items are then weighted by utilization as well. So PCPs are going to have a larger impact if you don't have enough of them on the overall region score than anything else. And then once you have like, okay, you got all of that in there, you got your scores, you see you have each red box. There's some work that like Addie's working on now that does like gap prioritization. And we don't have a perfect view of that right now. I'm still working on it, but it's like, okay, which things impact the most members, which things impact the most utilization, which things cost the most, which things have SCAs. There's plenty of ways we can do that at a more holistic level. But the scorecard itself is just geographical, like geo access and like
It's just
also
the
geo
text.
access and capacity. Yeah. It's entirely a picture of the data we have, like in the provider data system, and not from like external things like member complaints or things like that.
So you guys talked about how this scorecard is only as good as the rosters that you're provided. So have you thought about ways around that or other data that you'd like to incorporate if you could, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean we do some of that actually. There are some things like Luke put together an analysis that looks at historical claims from providers and adds additional specialties if we're confident enough that given the things that this person is doing that they are this type of specialist. If one roster does not have one guy marked as a cardiologist but another roster does, we do share that information across providers as well. So it's kind of the best picture given like all the rosters we have for somebody. And then, over time we're adding different things. We're talking now about adding CMS data, using that to help bolster the information we have about specialties. But the rosters are still like the list of providers we do have or do not have. Even if we know there's a guy somewhere, he doesn't come in our roster, then he's not in our network.
Yeah.
But to be clear, like I don't think anyone thinks we're moving away from trusting rosters. as the
No.
core way of identifying
Oh, yeah,
specialty
no.
providers.
There's also only certain things, if we do use external sources as something to measure adequacy by, those sources may or may not be valid sources for like regulatory filings, for example. So we might say, yeah, we're pretty damn confident that this guy is a cardiologist based on all the like, heart exams he's done or something. But if it doesn't say that in the roster, and CMS doesn't think we do that, like we still can't submit that. Certain regulators like New York State have like validation stages where they say, no, we don't know this person is a cardiologist, doesn't count, and they just throw them out of the adequacy standards. So we can get creative in some ways, but we can use those potentially to call a doctor and say, hey, we think you're a cardiologist, can you confirm that? And then if we have that piece of information, we can use it in those senses. But so we do some other work around that.
I'm curious just like what prompted the creation of this tool. Is there just like general industry consensus that patients just prefer to be close to doctors for certain specialties? Like, or in the early stages of Oscar, were we getting a lot of complaints or something about this? Like geo-access restrictions?
Regulatory filings or regulatory standards are almost exclusively built this way. They say you need to have 2 doctors per county and 2 doctors for every, 1 doctor for every 1,000 members or of this type, 2 per county, 1 for every 1,000 members. Every member, 90% of people have to be within this distance of that. So it's definitely built up off of regulatory requirements.
One more thing on that. I think getting the absolute right number of to have the best member experience in Manhattan, you need to have a PCP within 7.5 minutes. Figuring out what that number is, I think, is a pretty difficult exercise. And how we've set the thresholds, I think is a decent amount of borrowing from regulators what they think is a good score, as well as us just intuitively sense checking is it reasonable that someone should have to drive 90 minutes to go see an endocrinologist? And then piecing that together and setting our own standards.
I know these bounds are set off in regulatory, at least in the regulatory scorecard, based off of drive times associated with whatever the regulator says. However, do you guys know or have a view of what other players in the industry do and how this compares? And I'm teeing this up a little bit for something Josh said to me one time. He's like, this is something that's kind of new, everyone doesn't do. Is this something we should be selling and thinking about how we interact with our partners?
Do you mean the actual software itself, or do you mean how our networks compare to competitor networks?
Software knows.
Do you want to speak to why this is better than Quest?
Quest is the software that basically does that. They are a third-party vendor, pretty much everyone uses them. They're based mostly around adequacy and not around member experience tracking, I believe, although I'm not intimately familiar with the product.
They don't do drive time. They don't Connor has a model that says this is the member, essentially if you ran the Google Maps where it says how long will it take me to get from here to there 1 million times, what would be the actual drive time, which is closest to what the member will actually experience. No one else in the industry does that. They just say here is a circle of this size, we think it takes 30 minutes to go anywhere in the circle.
Yeah, and it's also built to be flexible on our end to add other things into it. Eventually, potentially, changing the kind of cost function from drive times to price or something like that. To understand the geographic distribution of price and how that impacts people.
You can't.
Not now, but eventually that's something we've thought about adding. And then also, it's built pretty strongly to integrate into our system, into our provider data system, into our ontology, how we like to think about providers and locations and all that kind of stuff. Yes, potentially could be something to sell. I haven't thought too much about that yet.
I'm not actually selling the product
Yeah,
itself, but at least when we're having, so you alluded to the Florida conversation
Yeah.
that we are potentially going to be having. Like, I don't think they have this level of detail
Yeah.
on their own network.
Yeah.
So I think we need to use it as an opportunity to be like, all right,
Yeah.
look at what we are doing. Can this help you?
Yeah.
Like Florida Hospital can look at their FHPN network and like click into Osceola County and be like, oh, we don't have anything in this part of Osceola County.
Yeah.
Like, we should do something right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like been discussed as well, you know, with, okay, what other products that you potentially sell is kind of provider-based tools, not for other payers, but like for providers. Saying like, okay, can you analyze your own network for quality and things? It has been considered.
Yeah. Makes sense.
More of those like down the line, a ways down the line type things, if that's the way we decide to go.
Cool. Any other questions? I think we're at time. Thank you guys.
Cool.
You guys are out, thank you.